Some people move to the countryside for peace and quiet. Me? I moved to escape control. No landlords, no bosses, and definitely no HOA boards. Just me, my land, and the kind of freedom you can only buy with sweat and dirt. For a while, it worked. The birds were my alarm clock, the wind my neighbor. But then she showed up. Not from my neighborhood, not even from my side of the road, but she walked in like she owned the place. Her clipboard wasn't just paper and pen, it was a warning. What started as passive-aggressive cookies turned into trespassing, false petitions, and a war I never asked for. But if she thought I'd roll over, she chose the wrong neighbor. When I left Phoenix, I wasn't running away. I was running towards something. Solitude. Peace. A fresh start. After 20 years working as a detective, I had earned the right to disappear, and I found exactly what I was looking for in the gentle hills outside Flagstaff, Arizona. The property wasn't fancy, just a modest farmhouse on 10 acres of land, with a line of tall evergreens shielding it from the nearest paved road. But to me, it was freedom. My freedom. No HOA, no sirens, no noise. I spent the first few weeks restoring what had been neglected, patching the roof, repainting the barn, planting rows of tomatoes along the southern edge of the property. Each day ended with the kind of quiet you could feel in your bones. It was a kind of healing I hadn't even realized I needed. And then she came. It was a Saturday morning, warm and dry. I was kneeling in the garden bed, elbow deep in soil, when I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel behind me. "Hello there." I turned and saw a woman standing on the other side of my gate. She was maybe late 50s, dressed like she'd just stepped out of a catalog, blazer, pearls, perfectly coiffed hair. She waved with the kind of forced cheer you learn to be suspicious of in my line of work. "I'm Sandra Ellison, president of the Willow Creek HOA, just down the hill," she said, gesturing toward a neighborhood I had intentionally chosen not to live in. "I just wanted to come by and introduce myself." I wiped my hands on a rag and stood. "I appreciate that, but I'm not part of Willow Creek. This land is separate, private." Her smile didn't budge, but her eyes narrowed a fraction of an inch. "Oh, of course. Still, it's always nice to keep the area looking consistent, don't you think? We try to keep things tidy." I raised an eyebrow. "Well, I like my tomatoes messy." She gave a soft chuckle, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "I understand. Well, if you ever need help navigating local expectations, the HOA is always available to assist." I gave her a nod, polite but firm. "I think I'll manage." And she left shortly after, but not before scanning my property like she was assessing a crime scene. At the time, I chalked it up to neighborhood curiosity. I didn't think much of it. People like Sandra are just part of life, even in the woods. But something about the way she'd spoken stuck with me. That eerie emphasis on expectations, on consistency. I'd seen that look before, on overzealous officers, on bad politicians. The kind of look that says, "You're a problem I intend to solve." The next few weeks were peaceful again. I finished rebuilding the back fence, got the solar panels up and running, and even started beekeeping with the help of my friend Dale, who drove in from Sedona once a week. Life was simple, rewarding, until the yellow envelope showed up. I found it tucked into my front gate early one morning. No stamp, no name, just a Willow Creek HOA letterhead and a bright red label reading "Violation Notice." The fine was for unauthorized fencing exceeding acceptable height guidelines. I laughed out loud. Not just because the fence in question was barely 5 feet high, but because, again, I wasn't under their jurisdiction. Their guidelines had about as much power over me as a note from a kindergarten hall monitor. Still, I kept the letter. Sandra showed up again the following weekend. No smile this time, no cookies. Just her and a clipboard. "Mr. Ryan, it's come to our attention that your property is creating an eyesore for the community. We've received several complaints." "From who?" I asked, arms crossed. I'm not at liberty to disclose that. Then I'm not at liberty to care. She flinched like I'd slapped her, but quickly recovered. Your behavior is bordering on hostile. Lady, I left the city to get away from people exactly like you. This is my land. You don't have a say. Her jaw clenched. We'll see about that. That was when the line was drawn, not just physically, between her pristine subdivision and my ragged patch of earth, but ideologically. She didn't see me as a neighbor. She saw me as a blemish. I'd spent years investigating crimes committed under the guise of civic order. HOA drama might have looked like small potatoes compared to my old job, but I knew manipulation when I saw it. Sandra wasn't done, and something told me she wasn't going to play fair. The next 2 weeks became a quiet war. First came the whispers. At the local farmers market in Flagstaff, where I sold honey and fresh herbs, familiar faces started avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Halberd, who once complimented my basil every weekend, now hurried past like I had a contagious disease. Dale noticed it too. They're acting like you poisoned the creek, he muttered one afternoon, helping me pack up. That's because Sandra's been busy, I said, holding up a copy of the Willow Creek HOA newsletter. I had found it crumpled near my mailbox, clearly meant for someone else. Inside was a bold headline: Unregulated property threatens neighborhood integrity. She never mentioned me by name, but the description, a recently acquired property adjacent to Willow Creek failing to meet community standards, left no doubt. It was me. It would have been laughable if it hadn't started affecting my livelihood. Customers canceled honey subscriptions. A small shop that used to carry my produce stopped responding to messages. I wasn't just dealing with letters now. Sandra was using her influence, quietly but effectively, to turn people against me. And then came the trash. At first, it was just a few empty beer cans tossed near the gate. Then fast food wrappers. Then entire garbage bags dumped at the edge of my property, always late at night. I set up more cameras, but whoever did it knew how to avoid being seen. Approaching from the tree line, hidden under the dark. It escalated quickly. One morning, I found my irrigation line slashed. Another night, someone drove a pickup truck through the edge of my tomato rows, tearing up months of work. I reported everything to the county sheriff, but with no witnesses, no plates, no direct footage, they could only make a report. You think it's someone from the HOA? The deputy asked, scribbling on his pad. I think it's someone who thinks they're above the law, I replied. But Sandra wasn't stupid. She wouldn't be the one behind the wheel, or holding the knife. She had others to do her dirty work. The final straw came when Dale called me in a panic. Check your email, he said. Now. It was a PDF attachment, a scanned letter from the city zoning office. Sandra, as president of Willow Creek HOA, had submitted a formal complaint claiming my land violated environmental codes due to improper waste disposal, unapproved fencing materials, and risk of fire hazard. Attached were photographs of my compost heap, my old wooden fence, even my beekeeping equipment, cropped and angled to make everything look far worse than it was. The photos had been taken from within my property line. She trespassed, I muttered, and she had gone too far. I printed every page and filed an injunction that same week. My attorney, Eric Young, a sharp, no-nonsense man from Flagstaff with a distaste for HOA tyranny, was incensed. She's trying to make your property unlivable, he said. If we don't stop her now, she'll either get your land through annexation or bleed you dry in court fees. She won't get either, I replied, but we need leverage. That's when Eric leaned in. Then maybe it's time we go digging into her backyard. Eric didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, he had filed a formal request for Sandra Kirkland's public records as HOA president. Meeting minutes, financial audits, board correspondence, the whole administrative paper trail. While waiting on documents, Eric's team began investigating her personal and business affiliations. If she's pushing this hard to take your land, Eric had said, then there's something on it, or next to it that matters more than she's letting on. He was right. It started with a zoning map. Buried in a city planning report from the previous year was a proposed expansion of Willow Creek Estates, a new luxury subdivision meant to sit adjacent to the current development. It was still in early proposal stages. But the kicker? The access road for that future development cut directly through my property. My land wasn't just some eyesore to Sandra. It was a physical obstacle, the kind that would cost her project millions to reroute. We didn't have to look far to confirm it. Her name wasn't directly attached to the development company, but her husband, Mark Kirkland, was listed as a partner in a real estate holding group, Redstone Partners, LLC. A quick search showed Redstone was spearheading the expansion. So this was never about community standards, I muttered, staring at the documents. She's not just HOA president. She's protecting an investment, Eric nodded grimly. If you hadn't pushed back, she would have steamrolled you into submission. Fueled by the revelation, we dug deeper. Eric subpoenaed surveillance footage from nearby traffic cams, checked public complaints filed by the HOA, and uncovered a pattern. Sandra had done this before. 2 years ago, an older couple living on a lot adjacent to Willow Creek mysteriously sold and moved after a series of violations and community conflicts. Their property was now a community dog park. Another local farmer, 1 county over, had received repeated zoning complaints and environmental violations until he relocated, leaving his land conveniently empty for an HOA-planned nature trail. She had a pattern, and now we had proof. But the breakthrough came from a source I never expected. Lisa Monroe, a soft-spoken woman who lived at the edge of the HOA border, showed up at my door one Sunday morning with a box of paperwork. "I saw your post online," she said quietly, "and I wanted to help." Inside the box were internal HOA emails, ones she'd saved while briefly serving on the board. One in particular made Eric's jaw tighten. It was from Sandra, sent 6 months prior. "The zoning board won't push through the expansion without an access guarantee. The farm is still the issue. I'm working on applying indirect pressure. But if that doesn't work, we escalate. He won't last through winter." He, me, and escalate was exactly what she had done. Eric leaned forward at the kitchen table, eyes locked on mine. This is enough to bury her. Not just in court, but in public. But I wasn't ready to go public just yet. First, I needed her to see it coming. I needed her to feel it, so I planned a meeting. I called the HOA office under a false name and requested an appointment. Eric advised against it. But I needed to look her in the eye. I needed to see how she reacted when I let her know I knew everything. The day of the meeting, I arrived early and sat in the waiting area. When Sandra finally walked in, she was wearing her usual blazer and smug expression. That smile dropped the moment she saw me. "Ryan," she said, frozen in the doorway. "This meeting was canceled." I decided to reschedule it myself. I laid a single folder on the desk between us. Inside, just 2 items, the zoning expansion map and her email. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she sat down. "You've been busy," she said carefully, masking her nerves. "So have you," I replied. "I particularly liked the part where you planned to run a road through my kitchen." Her mouth tightened. "You have no idea how complicated this is." "No, Sandra. It's actually very simple. You tried to take something that wasn't yours, and now you're about to lose everything because of it." She shifted in her chair. "What do you want?" I stood up, gathered the folder, and looked her in the eye. "Justice." I walked out without another word, because the real storm was just beginning, and she knew it. The next morning, I woke up with a single goal in mind. Make Sandra's secrets impossible to ignore. We had everything we needed: evidence, statements, legal documents. But now it was time to shift the battlefield. No more quiet meetings. No more waiting for city council votes behind closed doors. It was time to go public. Step 1. The press. I contacted a local investigative reporter, Jordan Blake, who had previously exposed corruption in a nearby city council scandal. When I explained my situation, I barely finished the sentence before he said, "I'm in." I gave him copies of the zoning plans, the annexation request, the emails, and photos of the illegal HOA developments built on my land. What caught his attention most was the pattern, the other families who had been driven out under similar HOA pressure. By that evening, his article was published under the headline, "HOA President Accused of Land Grab Scheme in Willow Creek. Homeowners Speak Out." It spread like wildfire. The story hit local radio, talk shows. Even a few national real estate watchdog blogs picked it up. The post was shared thousands of times online. Comments poured in from people who had gone through the same nightmare. Some even offered legal donations. Step 2. The neighborhood. I printed flyers with the headline, the photo of my trampled garden, and a brief message. "If they can take my farm, yours could be next. Don't let HOA power become unchecked." I walked door to door, handing them out. I spoke to neighbors I'd never met, some who had signed the petition out of confusion, others who hadn't even known about it. Most were horrified. Many apologized, and some were furious, not at me, but at her. Lisa Monroe, my unexpected ally, rallied a small group of residents to petition for an emergency HOA vote of no confidence. Within days, over 40% of the homeowners had signed it. Sandra's perfect control was slipping. Step 3. The City Council. The final showdown was scheduled for a Thursday evening. That day, the council chamber was packed. Half the room was reporters. The other half were furious Willow Creek residents. Eric stood beside me, a calm force in a storm of noise. Sandra arrived wearing a sharp blue suit, shoulders back, chin high. But her eyes darted, scanning the crowd like she already knew the outcome. The hearing began. The council president introduced the annexation proposal, reading from a prepared brief. Then it was my turn. I stepped to the podium, cleared my throat, and began. "I purchased my farm 5 years ago to escape the noise of the city. I never imagined I'd be fighting harder for my rights in a town of 3,000 than I did in a city of 3 million. I laid out everything, the trespassing, the forged signatures, the surveillance footage, and the surveyor's report that proved the HOA's illegal constructions. I handed over the email where Sandra called me an obstacle to be dealt with. "I am not your obstacle," I said, locking eyes with her. "I'm your neighbor, and I refuse to be bullied." And Eric took over from there, detailing the legal violations, fraud, misappropriation of HOA funds, unauthorized annexation efforts. When he finished, there was silence. Then came Sandra's rebuttal. She tried to paint me as aggressive, said I had refused to compromise, claimed the HOA had always intended to include the surrounding lands in a harmonious, cohesive community. It didn't work. Councilmember Reyes, an older man with a reputation for being tough, spoke up. "Mrs. Kirkland, do you know what we call it when someone uses influence, fear, and false documents to seize private land?" Sandra opened her mouth, then closed it. "Illegal," Reyes said flatly. "That's what we call it." The vote was unanimous. The annexation was not only denied, but Sandra was referred for formal ethics review by the City Council. The HOA was ordered to remove any structures encroaching on my land within 30 days, or face fines of their own. As I stepped outside, cameras flashed. People cheered. Lisa ran up and hugged me. But then, something unexpected happened. A quiet voice behind me asked, "Mr. Ryan?" I turned. A young woman, early 30s, short haircut, glasses, held out her hand. "My name's Carla. My parents were the ones who owned the property where the dog park is now." She glanced down, then looked up again. "Everything you described, it happened to them too." That moment hit me harder than the council vote. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about everyone they'd steamrolled. Carla and I sat down that weekend. Then another former resident reached out. And another. It was no longer just about defending my farm. It was about exposing an entire pattern of abuse and making sure no one ever had to face it again. The news hit Sandra like a freight train. The city council's unanimous rejection of the annexation, followed by the ethics complaint, might have been enough to ruin her public reputation. But what came next shattered whatever was left of her quiet empire. Within a week, 3 other residents stepped forward with claims eerily similar to mine. Illegal pressure to sell, mysterious fines, and behind-the-scenes threats masked as HOA policy. One of them, Mr. Collins, was in his 70s and had lived just beyond the HOA's boundary before his land mysteriously became non-compliant and was eventually purchased by a development company, one tied to Sandra's cousin. This time, there were receipts, emails, paper trails, property transfer documents with suspicious timing. The media jumped back in. The second wave of stories labeled it a land theft scheme hidden in plain sight. Public pressure mounted. Protesters stood at the HOA's community center holding signs that read, "Protect our homes," and "Stop the silent takeover." Meanwhile, I had quietly filed a civil lawsuit against Sandra and the HOA. Eric handled the legal details, but I was present at every step. The charges included defamation, trespassing, destruction of property, and attempted fraudulent annexation. But what scared Sandra most were the criminal referrals. Because after the Ethics Board did their review, they turned over all documentation to the State Attorney General's office. That meant potential felony charges. And suddenly, Sandra wasn't as smug. When she appeared in court for the first hearing, she looked smaller. Gone was the crisp blue suit. Her shoulders slouched. Her face was pale, hollow. The courtroom was packed. Eric opened our case by walking the judge through the timeline. Every trespass, every letter, every lie. Then came the expert testimony. A licensed surveyor confirming the HOA landscaping was built well inside my land boundaries. A former HOA board member who testified that Sandra often made unilateral decisions and hid financial records. Sandra's defense tried to claim she had good intentions, that her actions were misunderstood leadership. But then came the surveillance footage. The court went silent as we played the clip of her trespassing in the dead of night, clipboard in hand, measuring my fence, leaving one of the fabricated notices tucked under a stone. Her attorney tried to object, claiming the footage was out of context. But the damage was done. Even worse for her, an anonymous whistleblower, believed to be one of her former board allies, provided a copy of internal HOA emails. In one, Sandra wrote, "If we can get enough complaints logged, the city will have no choice but to absorb his land. Once that happens, he'll either fall in line or get out. Either way, problem solved." That email hit the courtroom like a bomb. The judge ordered a formal review of the HOA's past 3 years of complaints and property actions. And just like that, a simple property dispute turned into a full-scale investigation across multiple counties. But while the court battles raged on, something else was happening back in the neighborhood. Something no one expected. People started coming together. Lisa, the neighbor who had warned me early on, began organizing weekly neighborhood meetings. Not the formal, rule-obsessed HOA kind, but real community gatherings. People brought food, shared stories, helped elderly neighbors with yard work. For the first time, Willow Creek started to feel like an actual community, not a gated battleground. Even those who once supported Sandra began questioning what they'd allowed to happen. And through it all, I rebuilt. I fixed my trampled garden beds, repainted the gate Sandra hated so much, replanted every single tomato plant she tried to have destroyed. Neighbors came to help. One woman even donated apple tree saplings in memory of the ones that had been damaged. That fall, I hosted the first unofficial Willow Creek harvest picnic. It wasn't fancy, Just folding tables, slow-cooked chili, and kids running barefoot in the grass. But it felt like healing. By the time winter rolled in, Sandra had officially resigned from her position, facing multiple lawsuits, thousands in legal fees, and the very real possibility of criminal charges. She quietly sold her house and left town. The house sat empty for months. A for sale sign stuck out front like a gravestone for her reign. But for the rest of us, we were finally free. The HOA was dissolved by majority vote. The funds it had accumulated, previously hidden in shadowy accounts, were returned to the residents. And a new community charter was drafted, one that prioritized transparency, volunteerism, and respect for property boundaries. In the spring, the lot where the old HOA office once stood was turned into a community garden. The first crop planted, tomatoes, big, red, and defiantly alive.